Hey guys, Yips here coming with another video, and this one today is going to be a talent guide for Nighthold. Now, the reason I'm making this is because there's so many bosses in Nighthold, and there's so many different specs that Warlock can currently run that are very powerful that I really just wanted to go over and discuss with you guys what talents are going to be viable on what fights. And the great news that I have for everyone here is that there's a ton of different talents that are valuable and extremely viable for each fight in the instance. Especially on the fights later on. There's so many different adds, there's so many different aspects to each fight that you can really customize your Warlock around to what your guild needs. So basically your spec is either going to depend on what you prefer to play or what sort of damage your guild needs, whether it be AoE damage or ad cleave damage or single target damage is really going to determine what sort of spec you're going to be running now. So let's just jump right into it. First, we're going to be starting with Scorpion and going in order from Chromatic Anomaly to Chiliax and so on and so on and so forth. So to begin with Scorpion, so if you guys don't know about Scorpion, what he is he's a Scorpid boss, and basically he just spawns a ton of ads every few seconds. Every few seconds there's a hole in the wall, a bunch of Scorpions come out, they walk around the circle of the room, and then they come out the back into your raid. Your tank picks them up and you AoE them down. Now, the obvious choice here is Sow the Seeds, okay? So all the other talents are relatively irrelevant. You could honestly not even be talented into them and still do top DPS, but obviously they're still going to be something you want to do, especially because of the burst phase that you have on him when he takes 20 or 100% increased damage when all of his armor breaks off. You definitely want to be running Malefic Grasp and get a lot of damage in during that phase, but for the most part all of your damage is coming from Sow the Seeds, so that's really the important talent to highlight here. Sow the Seeds is 100% worth it on this fight. It grants you a lot of boss DPS just because of Soul Flame damage and explosion damage from the seeds, and just making those Scorpions die faster and making it easier on your tanks. So these are the two talent specs I believe you should be running. You should be running Malefic Grasp, and you can run either Contagion or Absolute Corruption. It's your choice. You run Sow the Seeds, Grimoire of Supremacy, and Soul Conduit. Or you can chase Soul Conduit with Soul Effigy. It's your preference, whichever one you prefer to run. Both generate extra soul shards, just, you know, whatever you feel like doing for that fight. And basically the whole fight, you're just waiting for ads to spawn, banking shards. Once they spawn, you spam seed on them, they all die. You get a ton of damage via Soul Flame. Really fun fight for Warlock. These are the two talents I recommend everyone running on them. So, yeah. Let's move on to the next fight. So, the next fight in the instance is going to be Chromatic Anomaly. Now, Chromatic Anomaly again only has two talent choices. As we get on further into the instance, there will be more than just two challenge choices, but the reason that there are only two challenge choices on Chromatic Anomaly is because the fight is more like, it's more of a single target fight. Even though that there are ads on the fight, even though ads do spawn, it's still basically just a single target fight on heroic and normal mode. And what I mean by that is the ads spawn so far away from the boss that you're not really able to cleave them too well, and you're not really able to get in range enough to dump 2 UAs on them. Plus, the ads are just such high priority that Malefic Grasp really is just a stand-up talent for this fight, especially once you get the haste increase later on. So, the way that the fight goes is, you know, you attack the boss, you're in normal time, and then he'll slow down time to 30%. And he'll spawn an ad before he does that, and you have to go and kill the ad, and then that ad blows up into a bunch of little ads. You dot all those, and then you go back onto the boss, and then, you know, time is slowed down by 30%. The same thing happens. He spawns an ad, you kill the ad, you go kill the ads that the ad spawn, and then you run back to the boss and you kill him. And then he'll speed up time by 30%, so you'll be in this kind of lust phase, where your cooldowns are coming back faster, your damage is going out faster, all this sort of business. So you just do a ton of damage to him during that phase, and then he'll go back to normal time. But during that 30% phase, he'll spawn an ad again, and you have to go kill the ad. It's kind of far away. So basically, the way that I'm going here is you basically want to be running the Malefic Grasp spec. I highly recommend running Contagion for this fight, but you can run Absolute Corruption if you prefer to. Soul Effigy or Soul Conduit, it's your choice. I recommend running Soul Conduit just because effigy placement in that room is kind of going to be a little bit awful. So I definitely recommend running the first talent there, the Malefic Grasp, Contagion, Siphon Life, Soul Conduit, because you're basically going to be able to do a ton of damage to the boss, and then quickly move to the ad, not have no setup on the ad, do a ton of damage to the ad, kill the little ones off with your group, run back to the boss, and not have to worry about keeping thoughts on Soul Effigy while you're doing this, especially because just the placement of Soul Effigy, especially if you get one of the frozen bombs or things like that, definitely going to be the talent build I recommend you guys running. But these are the two viable options, I believe, on Chromatic Anomaly, and I think the ones that you should be running. Now, the next boss is going to be mostly a single target boss, and it's going to be Chiliax. So on Chiliax, there are a bunch of little ads that run around the room. They're these little cleaners. They're these little scrub guys that run around the room, but doing damage to them doesn't really count because you can't kill them and it has no impact on the fight. So it's really just you and the boss, and there's quite a bit of movement in the fight. There's movement because you have to go be kicking up cakes, you have to be clicking the bombs that are going off, you have to be aware of all the puddles on the floor, the boss is being kited around the room, so there's quite a bit of movement on this fight, but that doesn't mean Malefic Grasp is a bad talent. So the talents that I recommend you guys running are going to be the Malefic Grasp Soul Conduit build or the Malefic Grasp Soul Effigy build, but I also here included the Writhe and Agony Soul Effigy build. Now the reason I included the Writhe and Agony Soul Effigy build is because there's quite a bit of movement on this fight. Like I said, there's the bomb clicking, the cake, there's a laser beam in the middle of the room, all those sort of things come together to make it so you're running around a lot. Now Writhe and Agony build is very, very friendly to movement simply because you're running Contagion with it, and basically that means you have 2 targets to dots and 6 instant dots to be keeping up. And you don't have to worry about drain souling to get your damage off while you're worried about all these movement mechanics, and that's just going to make it so your damage isn't affected as much by the movement. So even though Writhe and Agony is less of a single target DPS spec, because there's less movement, it adds up to being more damage on this fight, potentially if you're not unable to get a lot of drains off with Malefic Grasp. So that's the reason I recommend you guys run these 3 talents. You can kind of pick and choose which one you want, especially when you're progressing on the fight. You can kind of be like, oh, I don't really like this one, I'll go try this one, and that's where the beauty of Warlock really comes in. There's just so many options and things like that. It's going to be a lot of fun to figure out what we're going to do on progression and things like that. So let's move on to Spellblade Oriole. So if you guys don't know about Spellblade, she is a boss that spawns a ton of ads, and the ads come in the form of elementals. So basically the way the boss goes is there's this mechanic that makes your raid have to do something special where people get targeted by either a frost, a fire, or an arcane element, and you have to place these things down in specific areas, and when it expires or whatever, it spawns elemental ads. Now these elemental ads are deadly, they need to die, they take priority over the boss. If you do not kill them off, you will end up wiping. So it is a heavy ad fight, and the amount of elementals that spawn is quite a lot. It's like 5 or 6, or more elementals, probably depending on your group size. Now, basically what this means is you're going to be wanting to run a build that your guild needs. If your guild has a ton of hunters, it has a ton of AoE classes, it has a lot of fire mages and things like that, classes that are really equipped to deal well with ads and not so great at single target, then you're probably going to want to run a single target build. So you can still help with the ads, you'll still do decent ad damage just because you're a warlock. You can pick a high health ad and burn it down. But you definitely want that single target damage if your group has all of that AoE, right? Because you want the boss to die. You don't just want to have all this ad damage and then have to go through a million phases because your group has no single target. So that's the reason there's 4 builds here. The first 3 builds are basically single target builds. Basically what's going to be going on during the fight is you're going to be hitting the boss. The ads are going to spawn. You might cast a Seed of Corruption like once or twice, but generally you're just going to want to be burning down the ads, snapping off UAs with Drained Soul and things like that. But the last talent that I recommend you guys running is the Malefic Grasp Contagion Sow the Seeds build. Now, the reason I recommend running this one is because you only have 2 dots to maintain with Malefic Grasp Contagion and Soul Effigy. So basically what you'll be doing is you're maintaining these 2 dots, you're killing the boss, and then when all the ads spawn, you're just spamming Seed of Corruption, you're killing them off as fast as possible, and this is for a group that has a lot of single target classes. This is for a group that has a lot of warriors, enhancement shamans, assassination rogues, all those sort of things that are really poorly equipped to deal with all of this burst AoE and stuff like that on all of these ads. You want to be running the Malefic Grasp Contagion, so the Seeds build. You could also replace Contagion with Absolute Corruption if you do so choose. You could also like switch Soul Effigy with Soul Conduit. This is just the build I recommend you run to give you a decent balance. It's basically a little bit of a variation on the Mythic Plus build if you guys don't know what that is. So yeah, these are the talents I recommend you guys running. Basically run what you want. It's just going to depend on what your group needs. If you need more AoE, run Sow the Seeds. Obviously it's going to lead you guys to doing a higher amount of DPS. If you need less AoE, don't run Sow the Seeds, run Siphon Life, and do more boss DPS. So these are the talents I recommend you guys running for this fight. Now let's move on to Tichondrius. So, if you guys don't know how Tichondrius works, Tichondrius is a boss fight where there's 2 phases. There's one phase where there's the boss, and there's pillars, and there's debuffs, and all this stuff going on, a lot of movement around. Well, not too much movement. If you get the buff, you can kind of move away and stand still. If you don't get the buff, there's a little bit of movement involved, not too much. And then there's this ad phase where he, brings you into this phase where it's kind of foggy and things like that. There's a lot of different, there's a lot of ads spawning, they're bats and stuff like that. You have to kill them, there's tons of them. You can AoE them down with Sow the Seeds if you choose to. That's why I included this build. When you kill them, you get a haste buff. The haste buff increases your haste, and so basically when he phases back, you can do a ton of damage to him really quickly, and during those phases, he's also going to be spawning ads. So There's a few different builds here I recommend you guys running. There's the standard 3 single target builds, and this is obviously going to be one if your group doesn't have a lot of add DPS again. But not only a lot of add DPS, these builds are still relatively good at equipped for dealing with 1 to 2 adds, cleaving the first 3, because Siphon Life and things like that is not that bad on 2 to 3 target cleave. It's actually pretty good. Malefic Grasp just gives you less spread than Wrath and Agony would. Wrath and Agony gives you more spread DPS. Malefic Grasp gives you more priority target DPS. So you can choose if you want to run a single target build between those 2 specs. But the last one that I recommend you guys running is the Sow the Seeds one. This one's going to be great for the add phase. It's also going to be good for any phase where there's additional ads spawning on the boss and they're standing next to him and you can AoE those down quickly. So it's basically going to be your choice again here. If you want to run Sow the Seeds, you want to do a lot of damage to the ads, if your group doesn't have that, you need that, definitely run that. It's probably going to be a good one to progress with because you're probably not going to need the boss DPS, and the ads are going to be the things that are wiping you, so it's probably the better progression fight. But once you get it on farm, once you want to kill the boss faster, perhaps the single target build is something you want to look towards going. Either way, all of these options I think are going to be viable, and I think you guys should be running whichever one you choose to run. Now let's move on to High Botanist. So this boss is kind of special because on Heroic and Normal, it is different than the Mythic version. And the reason Heroic and Normal is different than the Mythic version is because on Heroic and Normal, the 2nd and 3rd Council target spawns at specific health points during the fight. I think it's like 60 and 30 or something along those lines, right? So during this fight, basically what happens is there's 2 flower ads that periodically spawn through the fight that you're going to have to end up killing off before they touch anything. So they spawn, they fixate on people, you have to kill them before they run to them, otherwise they'll just spawn an infinite number of flowers and then your group will definitely wipe. So you definitely want to avoid that happening because so there's these 2 priority flower ads that whenever they spawn you need to target them, you need to kill them, you need to dot them. But not only that, there's going to be these fire orbs that spawn, and the fire orbs that spawn you need to kill them off one at a time in order to delay the explosion. So you kill one of the fire orbs, it explodes, and the other ones are ticking down. So you need to kill them off in order because you get this dot debuff, and if they all explode at the same time, your group will just wipe because of the insane amount of DPS that it will be doing to you. So on this fight, there's a couple different variations. Wrath and Agony is definitely going to be the one that's going to net you the most DPS on this fight. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing. It's a good thing on Heroic, probably, because on Heroic, all it is about damage, because they share health pool on Normal and Heroic, but on Mythic, these bosses don't share health pool. What actually happens is it becomes to it's basically a 3 target fight, that moves to a 2 target fight, that moves to a 1 target fight. So each time you kill off an ad, the other one will go to full health, or both of them. If you only kill off the 3rd ad, both of the Botanist or whatever will go to full health, and you have to start the fight again at 2 ads, and then you kill one, and then you have 1 ad left, it goes to full health, and you kill him. So I highly recommend running the Malefic Grasp build for the Mythic version because you're going to be focusing down one of them, and that is going to net you the most priority damage. But on Heroic, where it's just a total 3 target cleave fest, Wrath and Agony is definitely a really viable option here, simply because it's going to net you the most DPS. Now, you could run Sow the Seeds if you want, just because there's so many ads spawning and things like that, although I do not recommend it. I highly recommend you guys run either the Wrath and Agony or Malefic Grasp build. Wrath and Agony can also be run with Absolute Corruption. You definitely don't have to be running with Contagion. It's entirely up to you what you run there. I actually recommend you guys run with Absolute Corruption instead of Contagion. It's probably a little bit of a better talent. So, this is High Botanist. Now, let's move on to Croesus. So, Croesus is mainly a single target fight with quite a bit of movement and some ad spawning, and this basically makes it so you can run whatever single target build you want. The Wrath and Agony build is much more movement friendly. If you're not as comfortable moving with Drain Souling and things like that, definitely run that build with Contagion. If you're comfortable with movement with Malefic Grasp, if you don't feel like it's too much of a hindrance to you, go ahead and run one of the Malefic Grasp Soul Conduit builds. Basically, the way the fight works is he sends out beams on either side of the pillar, and you have to, or either side of the bridge, and you have to move either to the left or right side of the bridge. During that, you're gonna have to be cutting back on the bridge during the fight because he's smashing off portions of it every minute or so. And then not only that, there's going to be a phase where there's little circles on the ground. You have to go stand on them, or else if you do not stand on the circle, an ad will spawn. Now, you're definitely going to have a couple ads spawning during this fight, and that just makes it so you have to dot them and kill them and not focus so much on the single target. So it really just depends what you feel most comfortable running. Whatever single target build you feel most comfortable running is probably going to be the one you do the most DPS with on this fight. So I highly recommend you guys just play whatever you're comfortable with, and that's probably going to net you the best results for this fight. So that's Croesus, and now let's move on to Star. The Star boss, where you go up into space and all those sort of fancy things happen. So these are the talents I recommend you guys play on this boss. Now, For the star boss, basically what happens is you're standing still in the middle of the room and he takes you into space, and then he's going to do some sort of mechanics that's going to make you have to move out of the middle of the room. But for the most part, it's a fairly stationary fight. There is one phase, I believe, where he does spawn a priority ad that you have to kill, but for the most part you're just going to be DPSing the boss down, and it's mostly a single target fight. So that's why I recommend running these talents. I think Malefic Grasp is definitely going to be better than Writhe and Agony on this boss fight, simply because of the low movement requirement. So whichever Malefic Grasp build you feel like running, and whatever one you feel like you're going to do the most DPS as, is probably the one you're going to do the most DPS as, because they're honestly so close together on Simcraft that basically whichever one you want to go for is going to be the one that's going to yield the highest results for you. So I highly recommend running either the Malefic Grasp build, or, you know, if you're feeling not so comfortable with that, you can run the Writhe and Agony Contagion build. It's definitely an option. It just will do slightly less damage than Malefic Grasp for a pure single target fight. So let's move on to the last two bosses, Grand Magistrate and Gul'dan. So for the Magistrate boss, this boss is pretty hectic in the terms of there's quite a bit of movement, there's quite a bit of stuff going on, there's ads spawning that you have to kill, there's a boss, there's a lot of things happening. So which build are you going to want to run for this instance? Now, the build that I think you're probably most likely to be running for this one is going to be Malefic Grasp Soul Conduit, simply because Soul Effigy is going to be kind of a annoyance to place down in this fight, simply because you don't know where you're going to be standing at any given time. So Soul Effigy is good if you can stay in range of it during the entire fight, you don't have a lot of movement and stuff like that, but if you're not able to stay in range of it, there's not really much use using it, because you're going to have to place it down multiple times. It loses a lot of value. So I believe the most common spec will going to be the Malefic Grasp, Absolute Corruption, Siphon Life, Soul Conduit build. And the reason I think this is going to be the go-to is simply because it's so versatile. You don't have to worry about where you're standing. You don't have to worry about anything like that. You have a lot of priority damage. You don't have to have Soul Effigy tether you to the boss, and it's going to allow you to quickly switch between the boss and the ads when they do spawn. So personally, Malefic Grasp, I think it's going to be the superior talent here. Writhe and Agony, or the Soul, like both of the Soul Effigy combinations you could use. I would highly recommend using them once you've progressed on the fight a little bit, once you've got a little bit more used to it, and you know where to place your Soul Effigy, as that's going to be a huge difference. But definitely with the ad spawning that's slow down and speed up time and things like that, you're definitely going to be running the Malefic Grasp Soul Conduit build. I think it's going to net you the most DPS, and the one that's going to be most beneficial for your group. So last but not least, let's move on to Gul'dan. So Gul'dan is an interesting boss. Now, the reason that Gul'dan is an interesting boss is simply because Gul'dan has a lot of different phases in the fight, and in the first phase, it's basically pushing you towards one side of the room with all of the spinny greenish beams that are going on. And not only all the spinnish greeny beams that are going on, but there's a cleave fight where there's 3 ads, and then there's going to be a Gul'dan phase where there's only him, and Infernal spawning. So it's a really, really versatile fight. And then in the last phase, finally, it's only really Gul'dan himself and some eyes that are spawning. Now, what build are you going to want to run? There's so many different options here. It's like, could I run Soul Conduit because there's a cleave portion, but there's also ad portions? Should I run Soul Effigy? Should I run Writhe because there is a council fight, a mini council fight in it that's going to net me the most DPS? Should I run Malefic Grasp Soul Conduit because it's a single target fight? Basically, run what you want. Run what you feel comfortable in this fight. It's not really going to make too much of a difference, I don't think. You're probably going to make it through phase 1, which is the 3 council fight anyways. Once you get to the boss, I think Malefic Grasp Soul Conduit will be a great option. I think Malefic Grasp Soul Effigy will be a great option, because you're going to be able to place Effigy in that one half of the room and really focus on killing Gul'dan. Honestly, whatever one of these talents you want to run, it's basically going to be a single target with some ad priority damage fight. So that's why I recommend running these talents. I think that either the Writhe and Agony Soul Effigy build or the Malefic Grasp Soul Conduit build are going to be one of the ones that you want to run. But either way, this boss fight is super, super good, and whichever of these builds that you want to run, I think it's going to be viable. Now, there are some builds that I didn't include in this list. So if like there's Haunt and things like that, and all of these builds are going to net you good DPS. You can run them if you want to. You can try them out. These are just the builds that I recommend you guys running. Nighthold was a great instance for Affliction Warlocks. There was a lot of good things you can do on it, but this is simply the talent guide that I wanted to produce out for you guys, so you kind of know what sort of talents are viable on each fight. Now, I will include a link in the description below to this spreadsheet, so you guys can check that out. You guys can click on all the bosses, see what sort of talents as I was recommending. Now, it is worth noting with the Writhe and Agony, you can be running Contagion or Absolute Corruption. It is preference to you. Contagion is slightly more DPS, but Absolute Corruption definitely is good for those ad fights. So I will include a link in the description below. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe if you can, like the video, and I really appreciate all of you guys viewing this. So I'll see you guys later, and have a great one.